Good morning. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas week. Did you get what you wanted for Christmas? Have you ever gotten, if we're honest, let's be real, have you ever gotten a gift you didn't want? Don't look around the room, don't elbow anybody. Have you ever got something you didn't like? Aunt Edna knitted this terrible sweater that's just the worst thing that's ever been created, and now you figure out what to do with it. Do you donate it to Goodwill and hope that she doesn't shop there? Sometimes life gives us things we don't like. That's what we're going to talk about today. But I was thinking of my dad. He said growing up they had this little dog named Charlie, and Charlie was a cute little puppy. I think we're going to throw a picture up here for you. And yeah, isn't he cute? Charlie was an inside dog, and my dad's mom, my grandmother, she was a great cook. She made amazing food. But every now and then there would be something on the menu that my dad, as a little kid, was just not real fond of, you know? And he wasn't a super picky eater, but he and his little brother, there was just a few items they didn't like. And one of them, so they had this little system. Here's what would happen. They'd sit down at the table. Mom would serve food. They'd put it on their plate. They didn't have a choice whether they got to eat the thing they didn't like or not, right? But what they figured out was that when mom and dad weren't looking, they could grab the food off their plate that they didn't like and throw it under the table, and Charlie would come along and take care of it. And that was kind of a win-win-win because Charlie was real happy. This worked out well for him. The kids were happy because they didn't have to eat the gross stuff. And the parents were happy because they didn't know about it and they thought the kids had cleaned their plate. So it kind of worked out for everybody. Until one day, his mom made English peas. And so the plan was going fine. Mom and dad are looking the other way. They grab the English peas, throw them under the table. Charlie runs under. Turns out Charlie doesn't like English peas either. So the game was up. But it kind of leaves you in a tricky position when you're handed something you don't like, right? And the truth is, if you have lived on this earth for any amount of time, life has probably handed you a few things you didn't like. And I'm not just talking about English peas or ugly Christmas sweaters. Life can hand us some difficult things sometimes, can't it? There's some circumstances and some elements of life that we don't like, that we wouldn't have chosen for the menu. And I don't know if there's anything that can ruin your life faster than one of these little 1-inch lights in your vehicle. I bet you've seen this before. You want to talk about something you don't like. I don't know why, but car problems stress me out more than just anything else in life. There's nothing that can ruin a good day faster than that little light. There's nothing that can take a good week and turn it into a bad week quicker than that. And it's just a little innocent little light. My grandfather used to have an old van, and as it got older, it got more and more mechanical problems, and he considered himself a mechanic. But he felt like he knew what the check engine light was about and that it wasn't really an issue, but he got tired of looking at it, so he put tape over it. Anybody? Yeah, a little family photo. Anybody ever done that? I see some nodding heads. Yeah, that light can ruin a lot of things. You know what? Even Jesus himself, even Jesus, when he came to earth, we just celebrated Christmas, him coming to earth. Even when he came to earth, there was some stuff on his plate he didn't like. You remember the Garden of Gethsemane right before the cross? He knows the cross is coming. And he gets down and he prays. And you would think, he's Jesus. He's God. He already knows what's going to happen. He knows the whole plan. He's known this from the beginning. So he's just going to roll through it all, right? I love how beautiful it is that he saw the cross ahead. In Matthew 26:39, he said, going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, listen to this. My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. In other words, he said, I don't want that. I know what's about to happen, and it's going to hurt, and it's going to be unpleasant, and I know it's necessary, but it's not fun. And even Jesus himself said, I don't want to go through that. Have you ever had that feeling before? Have you ever got on your face and said, God, English peas aren't my thing. I'm sorry. Take that back. Life throws them some stuff we don't like. And we're closing out a year. Hard to believe, but the next time we gather, next week, it's going to be 2025. And I bet in 2024, for each of you, I bet life gave you some good things and some bad things. I bet there was some dessert on the menu in a few moments. I hope there was. I bet there was some English peas at some point in the last 12 months. Because that's the thing about life. It's so interesting to me that life is so beautiful and yet so broken. It's both. It's not all rainbows and unicorns and happy things, nor is it all just terrible and painful, although sometimes it feels that way. It's not. It's a mixture of both. It's a weird roller coaster ride. And I bet if you look back over 2024, you can probably point to a few times where God's goodness was on display, where things went well, where you were happy, where something good happened. Maybe you got a promotion. Maybe you had a child. Maybe you had a grandchild. Maybe something went right. Maybe, I bet you can point back and say, boy, there were some tough moments too in the last 12 months. So it's easy when things are going well. We can all be good Christians when things are going well, right? When the bills are paid and everything's fun and happy and we like what's on the menu, we know how to handle that. But what I want to talk about this morning is like, what do you do on the other side? What do you do when life gives you things you don't want? Unwanted things. I think there's three things that we have to remember about this, if you're taking notes this morning. The first one is that the pain and the brokenness and the hard things, like, that was not part of God's original plan. And it's important to know that. These are the things that, have you ever experienced something that just didn't feel right or fair or just, or it just feels like it's not supposed to be that way? I think even sickness can be that way. So a few weeks ago, I had the delightful pleasure of having the flu for 5 days. And you know how there's good sick and bad sick? There's some kind of sicknesses that, like, you're sick enough that you have to miss work, but you're not sick enough that you can't, sit there and watch a movie or read a book. Like, that's good sick. Then there's bad sick, which is you are out of commission and you don't want the lights on and you can't open your eyes and you just want the world to end. You know what I'm talking about? Good sick and bad sick. I was bad sick. It was not fun. It was not enjoyable. I was super out of commission. And fun fact about me, when I get a really high fever, I start getting delirious. Anybody else ever experienced that before? So, in fact, I call it fever drunk. I've never been drunk on alcohol in my life, so I don't know what kind of drunk I would be. But I have been fever drunk because when my fever starts going up and it gets to like 101, 102, 103, I start getting delirious. And I kind of go in and out of my head and I get real sentimental. The shadow of the ceiling fan looks like the dog I had when I was 6 years old. And I'm like, oh, I miss that dog. Just literally, your fever's so high that your body's shutting down, but your brain's kind of going crazy. I don't know if y'all have ever experienced that. I have. And so one of the lovely things I do during those times sometimes, because I'm usually laying in bed, and usually I have my phone not too far away, and so I send my family fever-drunk texts. If you're lucky enough to be in my contacts, you may get one of these one day. And they never make sense, and they never have context. A few days ago when I had the flu, I texted my dad, and I was like, no context, no introduction. I was not responsible for my actions at that point. But I said, what's the name of that hotel like 30 years ago? The name of that hotel we stayed at on vacation like 30 years ago. And he knows. So he texts back later. He was like, that fever's pretty high, huh? I get real philosophical, so I start texting real philosophical things to the unlucky recipients, like, the only thing worse than a cold toilet seat is a warm one. I'll never forget my grandfather's last words. Josh, are you still holding the ladder? That wasn't really his last words. So, if you're lucky enough to be in my contacts someday at some odd hour, you might get a drunk fever text from me, and your phone will ding, and your wife will be like, "Who's that?" Be like, "Oh, it's Josh." What did he say? He said, "How do police on bicycles arrest people? Do they just say, 'All right, get in the basket'?" Yeah, he's sick again. He must be running fever. But I was laying there sick, bad sick, and I could hear my kids running around in the house. And I hear my wife on the phone talking to a friend. And I was just so out of commission, and so my body was hurting so bad and cold and all this stuff. And I just remember having this strong feeling of like, this is not how it was created to be. Like our bodies weren't supposed to be broken like this. You ever felt that way when you've gone through some physical stuff? Like it feels, I know it's normal for us to get sick, and we know that, but it feels wrong somehow, doesn't it? Well, it feels that way for a reason. Because it was not God's original plan. God didn't create our bodies to get sick. He created them in perfect health. There's some things that just don't feel right. Sickness, divorce, loneliness, cancer, car wrecks, heartache and heartbreak of 1,000 shades and colors. Even death itself. I've always marveled at how if you go to a funeral, even if someone lives to what we would say is a ripe old age, they're 112, that's a good full life. Standing at a casket, it just always feels wrong. It feels like something's broken, like this is not how it was supposed to be. You know why it feels that way? Because that's not how it was supposed to be. God created, if we rewind all the way to Genesis 1, a perfect world and a perfect environment. And our bodies did not get sick. Our bodies did not die. There was no disease. There was no tragedy. There was no heartache or loneliness. He created perfection, and that was his plan and his intent until sin came along and broke everything. It broke our relationship with him. It broke our bodies. It broke the world around us. And it wasn't part of his original plan. But here's the beautiful thing. Not only was it not part of his original plan, but even when it happens now because of sin and its brokenness, the second thing you have to remember is that God can still redeem it. I don't know if many of y'all have had a chance to meet my next youngest son, David. He is all 100% boy. Here's example A. That's him with a frog. He loves frogs. I don't know why. Little boys just love frogs for some reason. He's 8. We adopted him when he was 4 months old. And when he was 4 months old, when we first got him, he could fit in the palm of my hand. He was a little tiny, little bitty guy. And he came to us from the NICU, where the nurses told our caseworkers that he had been that close to losing his life. And it was because he had been neglected, and he had gone through a lot of hurt, and he had been left alone in a crib for a very, very long time. But as an infant, typically, when there's a newborn, there's a lot of skin-to-skin contact with the mother and father. And it's fascinating. I didn't know any of this prior to all this going down, but that is super critical to the health of the child. Skin-to-skin contact. In fact, just recently, just this past year, there were several new studies that came out and research that's showing it's even more critical. We knew it was already important. There was a lot of documentation of it, but now they're discovering it's more critical than we ever thought. Just skin-to-skin contact. It triggers all of these growth hormones, so that's part of why he was so tiny. He didn't have that. And just a whole host of other terrible things he went through. But there's actually a name for that condition. It's called skin starvation. When you don't have skin-to-skin contact as an infant and the child begins to grow, it's a void that wasn't filled, and so it creates a starvation for skin-to-skin contact. So, I don't know how many of y'all have met David, but he is our little social butterfly. And good luck trying to give him a handshake. You will get a handshake, a high five, and a hug. Maybe 2 hugs. He is the most loving little kid you could ever imagine. And this morning he came in, he saw me, and he just hugged me and hugged me and hugged me and put his face up against me. And he loves touch because he was so devoid of it. But I think it's so beautiful that what happened to him was terrible. What he went through was terrible, should have never happened. But I think it's so amazing that we serve a God who can take terrible things and create something beautiful out of it. Now, we don't always see or understand that. With David's example, it's pretty obvious. You can tell God is going to use him in some special ways to show love to a lot of people. So I get it. Like, God redeemed it, and I can see how it's turning into something good. Sometimes we can't see that. Sometimes we don't know the reason behind our pain or our struggle or our heartache. We don't know how God's going to redeem it. Or, in fact, sometimes it can seem impossible. Like, how could God possibly use this for good? But he can. In fact, Paul, to the Romans, he said he's done a great job of touching on all these theological things. And then kind of at the end, he just flippantly throws this little comment in and says, and kind of as an aside, like, oh, by the way, I almost forgot, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and are the called according to his purpose. Which is where I hit the brakes and say, Paul, hold on, brother. Like, I need 2 books of the Bible devoted to this idea. Because you just said all. All things? I can see how some things can work together for good. I can see how God could take some situations and some pain and redeem it and turn it into something good. But all with no qualifiers? No, he didn't say all things are good, right? There's a lot of broken things, a lot of sinful things that are not good. But God is so powerful and so loving and so full of grace that he can even take the things that sin has broken and he can use it for good. He can redeem it. It wasn't part of his original plan. That's number 1. But even when it happens, he can redeem it and use it for good. That's number 2. And then maybe most importantly is number 3. Whatever pain you're struggling with, whatever English peas are on the plate of your life, it's temporary. It's temporary. Now, does that make the pain any less painful? No. But what it does is give us context to know that the thing you're struggling with this morning, the pain or the hurt or the brokenness that you're having to deal with in your life, it doesn't make it go away, but it sure helps to know that there's an end date. Doesn't it? As a teenager, I started having back problems, which you're not supposed to have as a teenager. You're supposed to be young and healthy. And I've struggled with it ever since. And thankfully, I'm able to hide it pretty well. If I didn't tell you, you probably wouldn't know. And I don't know why I did this. It was super depressing. But I added up the other day, and I won't go into all the details of my back problems, but it's super complicated, and it's got nothing to do with my spine. My spine's in great shape. It's more like arthritis related, where it just jumps around. It's kind of like whack-a-mole. You remember that game? That's how my back is. It's just this problem's an issue, and that starts to feel better, and this part hurts. It just moves around based on inflammation and stuff like that. But anyway, I added up the other day. Every single day hurts. Every single day. I woke up this morning hurting in pain. Every morning I've woken up, and I added it up, for the last 7,000 days. That was just depressing math, and I was like, man, that's depressing. And if any of you have ever struggled with chronic conditions or pain of any kind, you know that there are some days that are better than others. So I have some good days where it barely bothers me. It hurts, but it's doable. And I'm super grateful. Like, I've got back issues, but I'm able to stand up, move around. I can even exercise. I can live my life. It doesn't hinder me at this point. So I'm super grateful for that. There are many people with far worse conditions. But it does hurt every single day, and it has for 7,000 and something days. But the worst part is not that there are good days and bad days. You would think with pain, the worst part would be the bad days, the ones where it really hurts. It starts pinching on nerves and causing headaches and all of this fun stuff. That's not the worst part. The worst part is just that I know every day is going to hurt. I know tomorrow when I wake up, barring a miracle or a divine healing, I'm going to be in pain. And the next day I'm going to be in pain. And it might be a high level of pain or a low level of pain, but it's just constant. Have you ever had a battle in your life that you just dreaded waking up to it? But it always helps me put things in perspective, because I know that this back pain is temporary because this body is temporary. And that doesn't make my back hurt any less, but it sure gives me hope to know that there's an expiration date on this pain. I like to think of eternity like this. It really helps put things in perspective, and I can't totally encapsulate it because eternity is forever, but look at this dot and this line. So I want you to pretend that this life is represented. I don't even know if you can barely see that little dot, that little white dot over there. That is this life. Whether you live 20 years or 120 years, everything you experience, everything you do, everything you live, that represents your, let's call it 90 years. And that line represents eternity. Now, I can't accurately represent eternity because eternity never ends. So the line would have to go off the page and around the church and down the road and out to Fort Worth and out to Amarillo and around the globe and just never stop. But even just encapsulating a little bit of it, pain and brokenness and heartache are so frustrating. But when we know that it's temporary and it's not going to last forever, because the body I have that feels this back pain is going to last that long. But in heaven, I'm going to have a new body that is not going to wake up in pain, and it's going to last forever and ever. And I don't know what your brokenness is this morning or your pain, your heartache, but I bet you've got some. And I know that there's nothing I can say that can magically make all that go away and make it better. But what I can remind you of this morning is that your pain is temporary, but heaven is eternal. Your loneliness is temporary, but heaven is forever. Your heartache or brokenness or whatever it is that life has handed you that's unpleasant, it's temporary, but heaven is forever. In fact, Paul said to the Corinthian church, he said, "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory." Now, I get a little offended when I read "our light affliction." You're calling all the pain I've gone through in this world just some light affliction? Paul, you must have had an easy life. No, this is a man speaking who has been starved, who has been shipwrecked, who's been in life and death scenarios more times than you and I ever will, who has been beaten, imprisoned. And he says, our light affliction. It's not light in the sense that it doesn't matter or it doesn't hurt. It's light in the sense that it's only for a moment. And then he says, it's working a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory that's going to far outlast all of this. So I would ask you this morning to think, like, I've told you some of my brokenness. What is your brokenness? What English peas has life pushed onto your plate? If you were writing the story of your life, I have a feeling we would not write in the tragedy or the pain or the car wreck or the accident or the unemployment or the mosquitoes. I hate mosquitoes. I don't know why God created mosquitoes. They serve no purpose whatsoever. If I was writing life story, I wouldn't write that part in, and I wouldn't write I wouldn't write in 7,000 days of back pain. I wouldn't write in an 8-year-old who was so broken because of others' actions. There's a lot of things I would write differently. What part of your life would you write differently? Several years ago, actually many years ago, I was a young teenager before the back pain. We were on vacation as a family, and we were driving up through Colorado. And my dad got the great idea. The girls were going to go shop one day and do whatever girls do on vacation. And he decided we were going to go climb Pikes Peak. Now, Pikes Peak is America's mountain. That's what it's called. It's one of the tallest mountains in the United States. If it was about 1,000 foot taller, it's over 14,000 feet high. If it was about 1,000 foot taller, it'd be in the top 5 in the United States. It's a big mountain. That's a picture of what it looks like from about halfway up. So he got the great idea, like, hey, let's go have some fun and climb this mountain. And I was young and dumb and stupid, and I said, that sounds terrific. What could possibly go wrong? So Mom took us to the trailhead early in the morning. It was dark, wasn't even light yet. and we were going to get an early start, and they were going to drive up. You can drive up the backside of it. And so we were going to hike up, and it's about 14 miles from the trailhead to the peak. And we were going to hike up it, and they were going to do fun stuff, and then they were going to drive up the back and meet us up there, and we would ride down with them. Perfect plan. So we set out that morning, and we start hiking, and the sun starts coming up. The weather is beautiful, and the scenery is beautiful. It was the base of the trail is relatively flat. As you get up the mountain, it gets more and more steep, but the base of it's pretty flat. Beautiful trail, beautiful just aspen forests and all these creeks and rivers, and it's just gorgeous. Beautiful place. And so, man, this is great. We're just enjoying this hike. Dad and I are just getting it, feeling great, and we're passing lots of people because a lot of people use the base of the trail to jog every morning or run or ride a bike or whatever, and they'll do it a couple miles and come back and go about their day. So there's a lot of traffic and people, and we're hiking, we're excited, we're feeling good. So we keep hiking, and 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 we keep hiking. And the further we go, the less people we see. Crowd starts to thin out because not many people go that high. And we keep going, and we're still feeling okay. And we made pretty good progress. I don't forget exactly how far we had gotten. And we get a phone call. Well, actually, we didn't get a phone call. Dad's phone beeped, and it was a voicemail. And this was way back in the day. So this was before the fancy phones we have now. This was the super old school first version cell phone with terrible reception. So you missed half your calls. And if you did answer it, it sounded like that. You remember that? The kids are like, what are you talking about? That's how it used to be. So he gets a voicemail. He doesn't have enough to get a call, but somehow a voicemail comes through. And so he clicks on it and listens, and it's real broken up, but he can hear my mom, and the second he starts to listen to the message, he knows something's wrong. My mom was a very flatline person. She did not get overly excited. She was not overly emotional. She was very stable and calm. So whenever she got worked up, it means somebody died or somebody was hurt. And all her message said was, hey, you've got to call me as soon as you can. Click. Well, my dad's battery is going dead because cell phone batteries didn't last very long back in the day. And he tries to call, and we don't have enough signal to get a call out. And we're starting to panic because we know if she's that worked up, something bad is wrong. The first thing that comes to our mind is a car wreck. They've been in an accident of some kind or something. That's the only kind of thing that would get her that worked up. Can't get a call out, not enough signal, and then his phone goes dead. So now we're definitely never going to get a call out. We're stranded. I don't know if we were halfway up the mountain or more. It would take hours and hours and hours to get back to the bottom now. So we're closer to the top than we are the bottom. But the weather's starting to get worse. And now we've been having a nice little joyride, and now we're afraid and we're worried. And worry does some weird things to you, doesn't it? And worry can make your brain so creative. Anybody who says, oh, I'm not the creative type, you're just not worried enough. Because if you get worried, your brain can create 1,000 fake scenarios for you to worry about. So we're running through it. Is it a car wreck? Did somebody get hurt? What happened? So now we're hiking with urgency. And we pick up our pace. Here's how intelligent we were. Just going to brag on us for a second. We didn't take any food. We took 1 bottle of Gatorade and 1 small bottle of water. That's not enough if you've ever done any hiking. We took I didn't even have a jacket. I had some kind of little pullover thing. We were the most idiotic, unprepared, naive hikers the world has ever seen. And we've been going for hours. We started in the dark that morning, and it's getting more and more steep. Like I said, there's no other people around, because if there had been other people, we'd try to find somebody. Do you have a phone? Can you get out? Nobody around, which probably should have been clue number 1. What are you doing here if nobody else thinks it's a good idea to be on the mountain right now? And the weather starts to move in, and the wind starts to blow. And I don't mean a nice little breeze. I mean like tornado kind of wind. But we've got no option. Like, we can stand here in the woods and just let it get dark, or we can keep hiking and try to make the summit. Now, the other thing we had going against us was they shut the mountain down at a certain time in the evening, and we knew that. So they have this little, I don't know if they still have it or not, I haven't been there in years, but they had this little train on these tracks, this little tram that goes up to the top of the mountain and back down, and people ride up and down if you don't drive up the road. And we knew that the last train out was like, I think at 5 o'clock or something. And then there's a couple of little buildings on top of the mountain, and that's about it. It's super high. There's not much oxygen up there, so you don't want to be up there for a long time. But in the evening, they would shut it all down. The train would go down. Everyone would leave. And we knew if we didn't get there in time, there wasn't going to be anybody up there. And we weren't going to have a way off the mountain. So we're hiking with urgency, and we pick up the pace, and we're getting it, and we're worried, and now we're not having fun and joking and laughing. Now we're just scared and hiking and climbing and climbing. And you just feel like you've got to be close to the top. And you come around a corner, and you see the peak off in the distance. And it looks just like it did 8 hours ago when you started that morning. You're like, you've got to be kidding me. We climb, and we climb, and we climb. We've had no food. So now we're starting to get weak. We hadn't had enough to drink. And now we're getting up at altitude. I started to get altitude sick. I'd never had that before in my life. Started getting altitude sickness from lack of oxygen. And your legs are hurting and you're climbing. It's getting more and more steep. So now it's not hiking and walking. Now it's literally climbing. And we finally clear the tree line. So on mountains at a certain point of elevation, the trees and the forestry don't grow anymore and it just becomes rock. And we finally clear the tree line, which is a good sign. That means we're getting closer to the top. But it's a bad thing because those trees that have been blocking the wind now no longer block the wind. Now it's nothing but snow, because we're at that elevation where there's snow, and just dust. And I'm telling you, you have never seen a wind, the kind of wind that made it hard to stand up. And then as you get closer to the peak, there's switchbacks. It's too steep to climb. You have to walk back and forth and climb this way, sideways, back and forth, a little bit at a time. And we start on these switchbacks, and it's starting to get dark. And I think we had a watch, and we knew time was running out. And my dad just couldn't make it anymore, and he finally stopped, and he said, we had this little tiny backpack that had our water and Gatorade in it, which was long gone. And he said, I can't go anymore. He said, give me the backpack. Try to make it to the top before they close. I said, yes, sir. I gave him the backpack, and I took off as fast as my tired and dehydrated legs would carry me. And I start running these switchbacks. It had literally got to the point, not trying to be dramatic, but just it was so bad that I don't know if you've heard survival stories, but we were counting steps. Because your body just doesn't want to go anymore. And so we would count, just make it 8 steps. And we would count together till we got to 8, and we would stop because you couldn't breathe. There's no oxygen, and you have no food, no water, no oxygen. Bad combination for the body, turns out. And so we're counting steps, 8 steps at a time. And finally, he couldn't even make it the 8 steps. And he's like, you go up and see if you can get there before it closes. See if you can find help. See if you can find something. So I go taking off. And I go running up these switchbacks with what little strength I have left. And I finally get to the top, and I'm telling you that wind is so strong, it's hard to stand up, and it's hard to see because it's blowing the snow and the dirt and stuff, and it's really hard to see anything. And you couldn't hear anything because it was just sounded like that. So you can't hear anything. You can't see much. I've never been to the top of this mountain. I didn't know what was up there. So I go running around. I find some of these buildings. There's just like a few kind of shack-looking buildings. And I find them and try the doors. They're all locked. There's nobody around. There's no cars. There's no vehicles. Clearly everything is shut down and everybody's long gone. I spot the railroad track, the little tram track, and I run over to it and look. The tram's long gone. I can see all the way down. It's gone. There's nothing. We got nothing. It's freezing cold. So if you can imagine, at the top of the mountain, it was probably 20, 30 degrees. But with what turned out later, we found out were 60-mile-an-hour winds. The wind chill, pretty low. And I walk around, and I can't find anything or anyone. I remember I walked back over to the top of the trail because I was just going to wait for Dad, and I was hoping he was still trying to come slowly and make it up. Couldn't see him. I try to holler that there's nobody up here, but the wind just eats it immediately. I know he can't hear me, so I just sat down. And I remember it was the weirdest thing. The sun was going down. It was starting to get dark, and I remember looking down the trail, watching for my dad, and way, way down below was the clouds, because you're up way above the cloud line. So it's like being in an airplane looking down at the top of the clouds. And I sat down and I just remember feeling so helpless because I couldn't find anything. There was nothing else I could do. I don't know what condition my mom or my sisters are in. I can't help my dad. Like, I can't find anyone. I don't know how to get off this mountain. So I'm sitting there and I just started praying because usually that's what we do when we don't know what to do. We kind of wait on that as the last resort, don't we? I'll try everything I can think of. And if I can't think of anything else, I guess I'll ask the maker of the universe if he's got any ideas. And I just said, God, I don't know what to do. And I don't know how we're going to get out of this. We're on this mountain and we're stuck and it is cold. And I don't know a lot about hypothermia, but I know we're probably pretty close. And there's nothing up here. There's not trees to build a shelter out of. It's just rocks. All these buildings are locked. I was thinking, I guess I could try to break the glass of one of the buildings and try to get inside it, and at least it would block the wind or something. I had no ideas. So I said my little prayer, and I'm sitting there just looking down at the clouds, thinking like, in any other circumstance, I would admire how beautiful this is. And I thought I heard something. And when it's that windy and loud and noisy, it's kind of hard to tell. But I just caught something that didn't sound like the wind. So I kind of listened, didn't hear anything. I thought, great, now I'm hallucinating. Wonderful, I'm getting fever drunk. I sat there a few more minutes and I thought I heard it again. Couldn't tell what it was, just some noise that didn't sound natural. So I stand up and I try to listen this way. I start walking around again, trying to see if I can get closer or figure out where this noise is coming from or what it is. Or am I just going crazy? And I walk around. There are basically these two little buildings, and I tried both of them, all the doors, all the windows, everything. The only thing I had found was right in between them, there was a super old truck. I have no idea how they got this thing up to the top of the mountain, but somehow they did. It looked like it hadn't run in years. But the cab was open. It was old, but the windshield was still intact, and it was tucked between these buildings. And so I opened it, and I crawled up in there, and I thought, okay, if nothing else, if Dad can make it up here, we can at least sleep in here tonight and be sheltered from the wind. That's all we got, really. It's not going to be much, but at least we'll be out of the elements. So I'm walking around, and I go back to these two buildings, and now either I'm legitimately going crazy, or I can definitely hear something. And there was one little building over to the side that I had walked up to the front of, but I had not gone around, and it sounded like this noise was coming from behind it. And so I go walking around the edge of this building, walk around the corner, and there's the source of my noise. It is a diesel engine in an Army Humvee that is sitting there running with nobody in it. Thank you, God. I really thought I was dreaming at that point. I'm like, this can't be real. I've never driven a Hummer before. Then, from around the Hummer, walks a soldier. And he was as frightened to see me as I was to see him. Turns out, there was a small group doing high elevation, harsh condition training. And I think there was 6 of them. And they had been tasked with spending the night on top of this mountain in harsh conditions. Now, honestly, they weren't really supposed to be there in that harsh of conditions. The forecast had changed, and so they were kind of stranded too, but they were just doing their training, and I had busted them because they were supposed to be surviving the cold and all this, and what they were doing is they had the Hummer running, and they were an Army Humvee is not like a normal Hummer that you see on the street. It's small, you can only fit 2 people in it, it's very crowded, it's not very luxurious. So they were taking turns 2 at a time, getting in the Hummer and turning the heater on. And then they would rotate out, the next 2 would get in and run the heater, and they'd rotate out. They were cheating, is what they were doing, and I busted them. And they were as shocked to see me as I was to see them. And so in my blubbering, fever-drunk state, they were like, what on earth are you doing here? And I said, I don't know. But my dad's down there, and he needs help. And I started trying to explain that I'm sure it made no sense then, but like, phone was dead. My mom had a car accident. My dad's down there, and they finally got on me like, your dad is still coming up the mountain. I was, yes. And it was so cool to see. I admire our armed forces so much, but they are so well trained. Other than being spoiled brats who get in the Hummer when they're not supposed to, they're so well trained because they just immediately as a team went into action. And one of them took off down the switchbacks running really fast, got down to my dad, took the backpack, and carried my dad up the rest of the trail. We were cold, we were hungry, we were thirsty. I remember I was literally just kind of going in and out at this point, but I remember they got water from somewhere. They figured out we had nothing to drink. I'm sure they were thinking, what kind of morons are these? And how did they make it all the way to the top of the mountain? I don't remember much after that, but I remember that water was the coldest water I had ever tasted in my life. They gave us water. I think they wrapped us in those like foil sheets for hypothermia. They got my dad up there. They had some snacks and miscellaneous food. They started trying to feed us and get our blood sugar back up. But we were still panicked about my mom. And so one of the guys said, I can drive you off the mountain. Turns out the reason the whole mountain was shut down, they shut down way earlier than the normal time. So had I made it, wouldn't have mattered. It would have been shut down a long time because the winds had gotten so high. People were trying to drive up the mountain and it was blowing out their windshields. That's how strong that wind was. So they shut the whole mountain down. As my mom is coming up the mountain and gets to the security check, and they say, you can't go on this mountain. The weather's terrible. It's blowing people's cars off the road and blowing their windshields out. And she's like, I have to get up the mountain because my son and my husband are supposed to meet me at the top. I'm like, ma'am, I'm sorry. We can't let you go up there. Here's what they told her. I'm sure they were smart enough to turn around and go back. Nope. So that's when she drove back down the mountain and made the phone call and said, you got to call me. She wanted to warn us, get off the mountain. So it turns out the mountain shut down, but the guys say, hey, hop in the Hummer. I can drive you down the mountain and get you off of here. To which we said, yes, please. So we crawl in the Hummer. My dad sits in the passenger seat. There's not a middle seat, so I kind of crumpled up in the middle. Maybe that's where my back problems came from now that I think about it. But I got to sit on the heater, and it felt amazing. And we go, it was so surreal. I'm like, I am getting driven off America's mountain in an Army Humvee. This is crazy. This guy, just one guy went with us. And I think, honestly, he was really, really disappointed to have to be in the warm Hummer for like the next 3 hours. So I think that's why he volunteered. No, but he was super nice. And so we go down, we drive down to the bottom of the mountain, and we think at that point he'll drop us off. There's a security gate, and he's not really supposed to be off the mountain, so we figured he'd drop us off and we'd try to figure out a way to get to the hotel or something. He's like, no. I'll drive you to the hotel. So he talks with security for a while and gets clearance, and they let us through, and he takes us all the way to the hotel. We start just thanking him effusively, and we're getting out of the Hummer. He's like, no. I'll walk you to the room. I think, honestly, he probably didn't trust us to know how to get to the hotel room. It's probably what was really going on. I just thought he was being nice. He walks us into the hotel, onto the elevator, up to the 8th floor, down the hallway to the door of our hotel room, and we knock on the door, and my mom swings it open, and everybody starts crying. She explains she was just trying to warn us to get off the mountain, so nobody's hurt, nobody had an accident, we're all okay. Yes, we're all okay. And I'd never wanted to hug a soldier harder. Said, thank you so much. And he replied with 3 words. He said, it's my duty. He walked back on the elevator. But I tell you that story because I was just thinking about our pain and the things we go through and the conditions we find ourselves in, brokenness, heartache. And I was thinking of those soldiers. We were hungry, we were thirsty, we were separated from loved ones. And they just identified our needs and they just started fixing them one at a time. Here's some water, here's some food, here's a blanket. We'll reunite you with your loved ones. We'll fix all of these problems. And I thought of what Revelation says. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Now listen to this part. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God. And he's going to fix all their problems. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. One of my favorite sayings in all the world, and this is what I'm going to leave you with this morning, is this. I believe this with all my heart. For the child of God, everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. Would you stand with me this morning?